The following contains footage of an M-rated game. Viewer discretion is advised.
But Taijitu, I thought you were going to review Grand Theft Auto 4 next. Yes, that was the plan, but sadly my PC apparently can't handle it. It can play it, but not in the resolution I had hoped for. For those of you who don't know, I tend to try and get my footage at 1600 by 900, since I want my videos to be in widescreen. So for now I've decided to review a game I know my PC ought to be able to handle, Half-Life. What can be said about Half-Life? It's what spawned the Team Fortress series, it's had a few sequels, and the third episode may never come. But when it first came out, it was considered revolutionary. What made it so? And how does it hold up over the years? Only one way to find out. So we start up the game and see a picture of our protagonist, and we're given 3 options of difficulty. And since I have a review show and I have to get through this game as soon as possible, let's pick easy. The game takes place in Black Mesa, an underground facility, and you play as a named Gordon Freeman, who, somehow, without even knowing how to speak, managed to get a PhD in theoretical physics. How a man was able to earn a degree in theoretical physics at all, as well as doing so without even being able to ask someone for help, is well beyond my knowledge. He's agreed to, or in the very least hasn't protested against, taking part in a grand science experiment. If I had one, I'd bet my own PhD that this is going to go horribly wrong. One feature that I thoroughly enjoyed was the spray feature. I always set mine to yellow and splat. I piss on your grave. So now we're given the opportunity to mess around a bit and interact with our surroundings. And honestly, this is one of my favorite parts of the game because it demonstrates one of the things that made Half-Life such a novelty at the time. Immersion. You get to interact with common objects around the facility, such as a microwave, and it makes it feel like a real experience.
My God, what are you doing?
So before continuing with the experiment, Gordon is required to put on his HEV suit, and immediately after this, music starts playing. And I turned it off. But unlike in my last review where I did so for copyright reasons, here I turned it off because it simply doesn't make sense for it to be playing. And I felt it went against the whole immersion thing this game has going on. That's not to say that I'm against the music, I'm just glad I have the option to turn it off. Another thing that made Half-Life revolutionary at the time was being the first game in the first-person shooter genre to have a story. That story is, like I mentioned earlier, he takes part in an experiment and it goes horribly wrong. Hey, I didn't say it was a complex story. So after the previously mentioned experiment goes horribly wrong, the game begins for real. You're now trapped in an underground facility with only one goal in mind: survive and escape. Let's go over the basics. You have 2 sets of health, your HEV suit and your standard health. The HEV suit is a lot like the body armor in Grand Theft Auto, except unlike in GTA where you would almost always take damage to the armor exclusively until it ran out, the HEV merely provides partial protection from damage. Because of this, I found trying to keep my HEV suit health up to be more trouble than it's worth. That brings me to the next aspect of the game, as well as the main source of the game's challenge, resource management. While the game gives you a fair amount of ammo and health kits along the way, nearly all of it is limited. There are only 2 weapons in the entire game that give you unlimited ammunition, and one of them is your melee weapon. The rest you'll have to pick up as you go along. The only time you're given anything akin to limitless resources is when using these health pools, which are only found at the very end of the game. Yeah, if you're an RPG veteran, this game will be analogous to legal torture. I'd normally complain about something like this in other games, but I actually find it fitting here because the game's built around it. You simply have to approach a situation, find out which weapons will be the most efficient, and work out a strategy. And there's more than enough ammo given to you, so it's rare to wind up in a situation where you've exhausted all your ammo, as long as you're utilizing an efficient plan. The only time I really had trouble with this was when I was trying to be a perfectionist and survive with all my ammo and health. Now I'd like to talk about Gordon Freeman's muteness. Gordon Freeman may very well be one of the best uses of a mute I've ever seen. So let's talk about this heroic mime trope. It's certainly nothing new. We've seen it in Zelda, Pokemon, and even GTA 3, but I feel it actually works more effectively here. One of my problems with the trope is that there's always something that the protagonist has to be, so you're usually not in complete control of their personality. For example, we know in the very least that Link is supposed to be heroic and courageous. And even with Claude, we know that he's not exactly a nice guy, as he offs a dude that was giving him missions just because someone paid him to do it. But with Gordon Freeman, most of the actions he's forced to take are ones anyone would take. The only actions he's required to do are escape, which anyone would do, and kill some things in self-defense. And that's where the scientists and security guards come in. Gordon could be an innocent victim in all this who's just trying to survive. But he could also be a raging animal whose instincts have brought out the worst in him during this anarchist chain of events. Thanks, but unfortunately I have no use for you now. And that's a nice pistol you have there, so...
Wish it hadn't.
Dead!
Now let's talk about the enemies. There are dozens of them in the game, and they all have their various strengths and weaknesses. The head crabs are generally the most common ones, and are often the easiest to dispatch of, but they're also really small and difficult to hit, and can leap at you when in range. The Voragons are another common foe, but they're significantly more deadly. Their strategy is to simply fire lightning right at you. That's nearly impossible to dodge. The only way to do so is to hide behind a corner or something. And as you progress through the game, you'll find that the Marines aren't exactly fans of yours, but the good news is that they drop ammo when they die. All of these enemies have their own strengths and weaknesses, but one thing you must make sure is to never let them catch you off guard. That's another major factor to the game's overall challenge. You're essentially a one-man army taking on dozens of people and creatures that want nothing other than your death. Now I feel compelled to tell you about one of the less appealing factors to this game, the platforming. Platforming isn't bad in and of itself, but it sadly does not work to this game's strength, as movement and jumping is kind of awkward, not impossibly frustrating, but awkward nonetheless. It might be better if you use a controller, but I wouldn't be able to tell you this since I played the original PC version. The source version might be compatible with controllers, but again, I couldn't tell you. Now I want to talk with you about the level design. Like I said before, a major factor to this game's novelty is its immersion, and as such, the levels are designed around it very well. It does give you a genuine sense of being trapped in an underground facility. The downside to this though is that the novelty of it kind of wears off after a while, and at some points it starts to feel a tad claustrophobic. Another issue I dealt with was that despite being extremely linear, there were a few occasions where you were required to backtrack a bit, and occasionally I ran into the issue of not knowing where I needed to go next, which is never fun. So let's talk about some of the larger enemies. Throughout the game there are some enemies that you'll notice are significantly bigger than the others. Some of them can be taken down after activating a few devices, others are simply unkillable, and some of them can be killed if you find their weaknesses. The only problem here is that it's never clear what you're supposed to do with each boss, as I'm going to call them. For example, the tentacles are only killable the first time you find them, and every instance afterwards you simply have to avoid them. Then there's the Gargantua, which is found multiple times throughout the game. You can kill it, but if you try to do it through conventional means, you'll end up wasting a lot of ammo. And then there's the Gonarch, which can be killed by hitting its large sack. But again, it takes a crap ton of attacks, and meanwhile you have to find a way to avoid being killed by it. I think one of the biggest problems with these enemies is that there's very little to distinguish whether or not an enemy is taking damage. In most other games a boss has a health bar, but since this game is going for such strong realism, it doesn't do that. One thing they could have done is at least give the boss some wounds, to show that they're being injured as the fight progresses. It's not too much of a problem, but it does get in the way. So that was Half-Life, and honestly, it's gotten kinda dated. Now hear me out, this certainly isn't what I'd call a bad game, but a lot of its charm lies in how revolutionary it was for its time. but most of its groundbreaking elements have been done in other games at this point. I've seen other games being immersive, I've seen plenty of other games with new protagonists, and the idea of having a story behind your game isn't exactly revolutionary anymore. Again, it's still an above average game, it's just not quite as spectacular as it once was. One thing I will say that it still has going for it is the resource management factor. This is something I haven't seen in other games before, and for a good reason. It's difficult to pull off, but this game really knew what it was doing with this, and as such, it still has something to set it apart from many other games. If you can catch this game on a Steam sale, you can usually get the whole bundle for $10, which is how much this game usually costs on its own, so I definitely recommend going with that option. So until next time, see ya!